I heard about it on the Herd today, just a little bit earlier ago, and it was just the fact that Colin Cowherd, he has this theory that it all stems from Nick Saban, basically saying that he has gotten a lot of coaches fired because of how good of a coach he is, and how the fact that a lot of teams have hired new coaches each and almost every year, it seems like,
to try and be on the level of
to try to be on the level of him. And so we're seeing that now with the NBA, or like he's equating it to the NBA, where Brad Stevens has done a lot with a lot of, I wouldn't say nothing. Last year was a bunch of nothing, but this year he's had some good players, but he's lost his second or first best player, tied for first, in Gordon Hayward, and he was still able to get in first place. Deficiency is up from first place. Last year I think they were 12th.
Mm-hmm.
And then also with wins, they're in third in terms of winning percentage in the NBA. And now it's where we're at today.
Do you think that's true?
I don't think that's necessarily true. I do think the Nick Saban thing is true. I mean, we won't get into college football, but I do believe that it kind of has a merit to it. I do think that it does make sense. But at the same time, I just think the way that Jason Kidd and the organization kind of talked to each other and how they interacted with one another was ultimately what led to his firing, and also being very average in terms of his record and playoff record.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of just like it's a poor excuse of like I can't I can't believe that general managers in the NBA or front offices in the NBA would be that. Like, it almost seems simple-minded, you know? Because there's not a bunch of just Brad Stevens just hanging out on the street corners. There's one Brad Stevens. So why are they going to fire a decent coach just because he's not Brad Stevens? Like, that doesn't make any sense, you know? Because there would be no coaches other than Brad Stevens or Popovich if that was the case. Because those are the two best coaches in the NBA. It's just a fact. So, like, what's the point of firing a decent coach? They fired Jason Kidd not because of Brad Stevens. They fired him because they weren't happy with what he was doing with the team, you know?
Yeah.
So blaming it out on Brad Stevens or blaming college football coaches on Nick Saban, like, I just don't believe it. I think it's silly. And maybe that's the case with college football. You might be right, but there's only one Nick Saban. And he's coaching the biggest football program in the country. So it just blaming, like, saying all these other guys are getting fired just because Nick Saban is so successful at Alabama is like, I don't know. It's kind of lame.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a point for it. I do think that because they basically are equating for Brad Stevens and Nick Saban doing a lot with sometimes what feels like nothing, especially on offense, because, I mean, I'm not sure how much you watch of Alabama football or even just college football. They do sometimes have, like, quarterback situations where the guy's just more of a runner.
Yeah.
And they end up creating a situation for them to be successful, at least in college football. In the NBA, Brad Stevens' example, basically, and also just Greg Popovich too, is that Greg Popovich has taken a lot of nothings, even though he has LaMarcus Aldridge, who's an all-star. He has done a lot to get this team to the third record in the NBA. So I do think that that's something that to look at, nothing to sneeze at. And then also the fact that Brad Stevens last year did it the same thing with Isaiah Thomas and Al Horford. You know, we didn't expect Isaiah Thomas to have this big of a season last year. He was obviously, you know, a good scorer, but he kind of raised his level up even more by almost scoring 30 a game.
Yeah, but just firing or thinking about it like that, like, of course other coaches aren't always going to be capable of that, you know? There's, like, I think I could name 3 coaches in the NBA who are capable of making players a lot better than they actually are. It's Brad Stevens, Greg Popovich, and in my mind, Spoelstra. He does that all the time. He makes players that, like, just shouldn't be good. They play really good in the NBA.
Yeah.
But there's not 30 of them out there, you know, where they would be the 30 coaches in the NBA and nobody would have any coaching changes. That's just the way it would be, you know. So, I don't know. I see what he's trying to go for. I just don't agree with it at all. I think it's kind of silly.
The only thing I'll say about that is the fact that, yeah, you can't find the next Brad Stevens, but if you keep trying to look for him, I think eventually you will find at least someone similar.
Mm-hmm.
It just will take a while, which, it comes with the job. But I think it also comes down to the organization and the GM and all that other stuff, making sure that they make the right coaching decisions
Yeah.
on who to hire instead of kind of doing the opposite of what the other teams do. They kind of hired these kind of, I wouldn't say no names, but definitely names that we wouldn't even consider being a coach in the NBA. And then it just leads to them just looking like it was a bad hiring decision. Like, I'm sorry to say this, but like the Earl Watson decision.
Yeah,
in
and I mean,
Phoenix.
even to some extent, I don't even think he got a fair shake, though. Like, he got fired after one game this season, That's crazy to me, and I'm not saying you're wrong necessarily, but I do think that people, will fire a coach just far too fast in any sport,
Yeah, and I think that's just the way the culture is now. I mean, we talked about it before, and I've said before, like, if you want to give coaches a fair shot, you give them at least 2 to 3 years, see how they do. If they don't do something successful, or if they do something like really idiotic, then I agree for them to fire them. But I do think that they need time to groom them and coach. And if you don't see any success in the first 2 to 3 years, I'm fine with you guys firing them. But I think you do need to give them a little bit more of a fair shake.
Yeah, I mean, just look at Fizdale. I mean, that's the best case. Like, one of the top coaches in the NBA is working with hardly anything as far as talent is concerned. And he lost 8 games in a row, big deal. Like, the Cavaliers have one of the top 3 greatest players of all time, and they've lost 6 of the last 8. They're not firing Tyronn Lue, They probably should, and they might, but, it just doesn't make any sense. People jump too far into conclusion, and I don't think they give the entire circumstances of what the coach is working with enough credence sometimes, you know? And I think after, let's go to the Jason Kidd thing. We talked about it yesterday. And some people, commented on our video saying that it's not necessarily Kidd's fault. And I don't think that's what we were saying in the video. It isn't Kidd's fault. He just needs more time to develop. Yeah. And that's not what Milwaukee is looking for right now. So if that's the case, then that's the right decision for them. So it just depends on what the coaching situation in an organization, really.
Yeah, basically what you said. Some coaches need to develop more time, or some need more time to be an assistant, or more time to kind of learn the ropes, while others are quick to just kind of, okay, I get it now, I know what to do, or like I've been doing this since I was a young guy, like in my 20s. Yeah, doing it. So, I mean, we'll see what happens for this situation. I just thought it was not an interesting point, but I do think that point has been brought up a lot on the herd, and I was just curious to see what your opinion of it was.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I just don't agree.